Republicans' biggest test in the midterm primary elections is clearly not their view on taxes, the border crisis, or the COVID response. It seems to almost all come down to whether they think the 2020 election was legitimate. And this could be dangerous, very dangerous, in the midterms. The Washington Post calling it the GOP's stolen election litmus test, noting that virtually all of the non-incumbents former President Trump has endorsed have gone significantly further in echoing his fraud claims than existing party establishment. He has also pushed to install election truthers in key roles with oversight of elections, such as in swing state races for Secretary of State, he being President Trump, former President Trump. And it's gone beyond states like Georgia. Last night in Minnesota, all 5 Republican candidates for governor hedged when Hugh Hewitt, fantastic conservative radio host, asked in a debate very simply if President Biden won a constitutional majority of the Electoral College. Simple question. Now listen to the responses of the would-be governors.
I can't know what I don't know.
The legislature, as in most states, makes the rules. But the governor, in his dictatorial tyranny, long and aided and abetted by the Secretary of State, decided they would change the rules.
I do believe there was voter fraud at a massive scale across this country.
Those are answers to questions, just not the questions Hugh Hewitt asked. Jason Rantz, Seattle radio host, joins us. Jason, why is it so hard to admit the obvious? Joe Biden is president, he won, and move on.
I think part of it is that we very clearly saw some irregularities in the sense of just the common procedure associated with voting, and people believe that this election was stolen. I agree with your point that it was not stolen, but I certainly also agree that they, on the Democratic side, decided to take advantage of the COVID pandemic to change some of the rules at the last minute without going through the normal process. And when you've got a whole bunch of people who just simply don't necessarily trust the election, you can't just tell them you're crazy, you're wrong. You have to meet them somewhere. I do think that there are some people who truly believe that it was stolen.
Isn't it going to be
and that's a danger, I think.
There's also people who believe that there's aliens at Roswell, and you don't necessarily all go ahead and agree with them. Can reasonable people can agree Joe Biden won the election. There may have been irregularities. Democrats may have taken advantage of things. Yeah. But at some level, what is this need by Republicans to just bow at the altar of crazy conspiracy theories in order to try and win a primary? Does President Trump really have that hold over the primaries?
No, I think the question is whether or not they actually believe some of the conspiracies or some of their theories.
Which one's scarier? I don't know.
Yes. Well, it doesn't matter if it's scary from a political perspective. What they're trying to do is make sure that they're not just completely dismissing people who happen to hold a position that maybe isn't factual. And if you're someone who's in that camp who is trying to win an election, the worst thing you can do is push people away. Now, there's obviously the downside there, because when you embrace some conspiracies, or most conspiracies, or some theories, what you end up doing is potentially alienate yourself against some of the other more quote unquote, mainstream voters. And I think that that's really what this is about. I think there's just simply a reluctance to tell a potential supporter that they're wrong, because you need to convince them to get over their potential fear so that they actually go and vote for you.
Yeah, well, we saw what happened when President Trump pushed the election conspiracy theories in Georgia. That didn't really work out so well for Republicans. Why haven't Republicans learned that lesson, that pushing this, as we saw in Georgia, doesn't work? Not pushing it, as we saw in Virginia, does work?
I don't see the party as a whole embracing this right now. There are certainly elements within the party that are embracing it.
I guess the question is, are there elements in the party, though, who are going to be really turned off by the people who do embrace it, like the guy who says, I can't know what I don't know, or I do believe there was massive fraud? Isn't that going to turn off a much bigger part?
Well, it kind of depends on what the party ends up doing with that particular candidate. Look, I mean, there are a lot of people who run as a Republican or as a Democrat or something else who don't necessarily reflect the regular mainstream values of the party or some of the narratives. So, so long as I think the party as a whole nationally doesn't embrace it.
Yeah, you think about David Perdue in Georgia, though. He's at least fairly mainstream. He was a U.S. senator, and now he's off in crazy land. You've got a huge block of state senators in Georgia of Republicans begging him not to do this, and he's still going forth with it. 58% of Republicans believe there was significant voting fraud, and those votes changed the outcome of the election. Only 4% of Democrats, 20% of independents. How much of this, we'll set aside whether it's right or wrong, whether it's good for the country or not, just from a political standpoint, even if you win a primary with these kinds of views, you're going to just get skewered in a general election on this, right?
It depends on where you're running, right? I mean,
well, yeah, but
yes,
Minnesota, Georgia, these are all
the majority of places. Absolutely. But, you know, again, when you're looking more regionally, when you're looking at certain House races, it's going to be a little bit different depending on where you are. But again, I generally agree with the point of the party certainly shouldn't be embracing some of this stuff because it's not necessary. Right now, you've got a lot of policies that are playing very strongly to Republicans. You focus on crime, you focus on education, and to your point, it worked in Virginia. Focus on the issues, and that issue, unless this happens to be very, very popular of an issue in certain areas, the election fraud theme, I would completely stay away from it.
Hugh Hewitt has been great on asking about this issue, and we got to really take our hat off to him, especially because he points out so rightly at times that this may be a really great talking point in the primaries, as crazy as it is, but once you get to the general election, it can be a real Achilles heel. Hey, Jason, we always appreciate the explanation, you coming on with us. It's a great discussion.
Thanks, Leland. Appreciate it.
Good to see you.